Numerous reports indicate that manufacturing has emerged as the favorite target of ransomware groups and hackers. In response, a new report from Industrial Media discusses the evolution of industrial cybersecurity, its current state, and the tactics hackers are using, including phishing schemes, malware, and ransomware attacks. It also details solutions and arming manufacturers with the knowledge and resources needed to win more fights on this highly complex and ultra-competitive battlefield. Download the industrial sector's new battlefield by going to manufacturing.net/cyber. Hi, I'm Jeff Ranke, Editorial Director of Manufacturing.net and Manufacturing Business Technology. Welcome to Security Breach. If there's one positive takeaway from the spike in cybersecurity incidents experienced throughout the industrial sector since 2020, it's been the unifying nature of trying to find solutions. With hackers repeatedly demonstrating that they play no favorites in terms of the sector of manufacturing, where it's located, or the size of the enterprise they're willing to target, detection and response strategies can be universally dissected in addressing ransomware, phishing, or any number of social engineering approaches. And this data, along with the potential solutions it fuels, can be made available to the industry as a whole, not just the largest or most well-known entities. This is obviously good news for a number of reasons. According to a recent report from Tenable, the average organization was prepared to preventively defend 57% of the cyber attacks they encountered. So basically, you're flipping a coin every day as to whether you'll be able to prevent an intrusion. The report also provided some insight that might sound very familiar and potentially hit a little too close to home. It stated that nearly 3/4 believe their organization would be more successful at defending against cyber attacks if it devoted more resources to preventative cybersecurity. 69% said they have used 10 or more preventative tools in the past 12 to 24 months. 75% say their siloed systems form a barrier in protecting data. Universal problems typically generate the most response, and what I'm seeing is a much more aggressive response from big players throughout the industry, including the employer of today's guest. It's my pleasure to welcome Alexandre Peixoto. He goes by Peish. He's the Cybersecurity Business Director at Emerson Automation Solutions. Thanks so much for coming on Security Breach. Just to kick things off a little bit, we met down at an Emerson event and we got talking about cybersecurity, and one of those things is just with more connected devices, more automation coming on board, the industrial attack surface continues to broaden and become a little more complex and more difficult to defend. From your experience, are you seeing any particular areas or vulnerabilities that hackers are starting to exploit a little bit more now?
Yeah, first of all, thanks for having me, and I appreciate the time it took for us to actually, from the time we met, which was two years ago already,
right.
to getting here. But I appreciate, and I've been following your podcast, and I appreciate and have a pleasure to be here with you. Now, regarding your question, right? So I truly understand and believe that the additional connectivity, and I concur with you, right, that the additional connectivity actually increases the attack surface. And that's a reality that many customers are facing, especially in the industrial automation side, mainly because there's a lot of business needs for, say, more cloud connectivity. I mean, in the past, you go, say, 10 years ago, cloud would be a big no-no, right, for most of the industrial facilities. Now it's becoming more of okay, there is a business need. How can we get that done? And you have more connectivity, right? Different systems, different applications, and you have to interface with those. You have several third-party components as part of the solutions. I can tell you that my speech when I talk to customers, even defending the Emerson, the architecture for Delta V especially, there's no system out there that has only Delta V, right? Everything is an 100% of a mixed bag of many different solutions, right? So you got to account for that. And then you also have the demand coming from IT, right? That's saying, I need to see what's going on, right? Can I get some logs from your system? So all of that is, I'm not against any of that, right? I think that those are all valid and legit requests. The danger comes with, okay, in order to get these connections open, I'm not doing anything good from a cybersecurity perspective. Right? So I just enable a firewall port or I install an application somewhere. And that's where the danger comes, right? So I wouldn't say that there's more exploits or vulnerabilities being found by hackers or hackers trying to do something different. They've been doing the same, right? The difference is that now it's so more wide open, and because not all the cases you have a system that's well protected, you end up having more of a free avenue to make the exploits work, right? Which is problematic. At the same time, I always like to say that, the hackers or the evil community, right? The people that are doing the bad things, they work together, right? So they share
Yeah.
information among themselves. And the defenders, us, right? The user, the people that sell solutions to defend, even the good hackers, right? The people that are there to find vulnerabilities, we don't necessarily work together, right? This is changing, but I feel there is a big component of I defend myself, you defend yourself, and let's not talk about this. And I don't think it's necessarily a good vibe for the current situation we're living in.
No, that silo dynamic in the industrial enterprise is really frustrating. It's becoming more prominent. It always was an issue with a lot of the IoT developments, but now it's really coming to a head with cybersecurity. When you're meeting with customers now, are there more representatives from IT and OT in the room? Are you meeting primarily with the OT folks, or what are you seeing in terms of some of that shift?
Yeah, I don't think there's one recipe that works for everybody. There's a lot more IT people being involved, right? For
Yeah.
multiple reasons. Uh, at first, because most of the OT organizations use IT as a support, right? So they will go and bring in IT to help them with things like, hey, how can I deal with certificate management? This is almost a foreign language for industrial automation SMEs. It is a common language for IT. So those things tend to help. And I appreciate when the help happens. In fact, every time when we talk to customers to deploy a solution, we say, are you talking to IT? Are you bringing them to the conversation? Because the worst thing that can happen is they're not invited at all, or they're invited too late. And
Yeah.
the natural reaction of human is to push back, right? I mean, you invited me late. Why do I have to contribute with you, right? Why do I have to help you? So I think there's more happening, but I wouldn't say it's perfect. I think there's a lot more to be done. Add to that equation another piece, which is not all organizations have IT anymore, right? There's a lot of these
Yeah.
industrial, solution providers, or even the end users, which are outsourcing IT, right? So they don't even have the IT to actually bring to the conversation, and they have to rely on third party to help them out. So that's where finding a good mix of trusted advisors, companies that can actually assist, making cybersecurity easier to digest,
Yeah.
comes at play, right?
Absolutely. Do you find that that's really a cultural thing potentially in a lot of these organizations in terms of IT and OT either talking to each other or not talking to each other? Just like when we talk about cybersecurity investment, a lot of times that starts at the top and is sort of a trickle down dynamic. Is it similar in terms of that teamwork that either is or is not existing?
It is, unfortunately, and it's sad to say that, but in some cases, you enter a room to talk to a group of, say 20 people from a specific customer, and then you enter the room, you have half on side OT, the other side IT, right? I mean, the common thing about,
Yeah.
we don't eat together, we don't go out together, we have different friends and everything. That's your reality. It's changing,
Wow.
right? I
Yeah.
must say that there are several organizations, specific industries, you're seeing that more stronger, right? Where they collaborate more, they rely on each other a lot more, which is great to see. And I think
Yeah.
that's the path forward. Collaboration, working together, right? Because you're not in a supply demand or supply, I'm the provider, you're the receiver. That's not the relationship. The relationship is we have a business need, whatever that is. And then you have the shared services, the shared resources to make it happen. Automation, IT, whatever it might be, right?
Yeah, that divide is really strange, but as you've alluded to, it's getting a lot better, which is encouraging. I think that's sort of the overall message for a lot of things in industrial cybersecurity. We had a long way to come, but we have made progress. I think one of the things that's interesting too with the IT, OT, the sort of trying to come together a little bit more is in the process. I think there's a lot of tools, a lot of different overlap or tools that tried on IT. Now we're trying to implement them on OT. We're not quite sure how they work. And as a result, one of the things that's making a lot of OT security specialists' job more difficult is they are inundated with all of these different types of tools. Either they've already been purchased, so they feel like they should keep using them, or there's so many available, they're not sure where to start. Maybe you could offer a little perspective there in terms of assessing how do you figure out which tools are right for you and maybe which ones to get rid of?
Yeah, I think, I wouldn't say it's right or wrong, first of all, right? I think there is a business demand, and that's what justifies the amount of companies out there that have been just founded in the recent years, right? If you take a snapshot of the cyber companies 5 years ago that were existing and the ones that are now, I mean, it just exploded. The amount of companies out there, and each one having a niche market, a niche specific tooling, and most of them are great. Some of them are gonna continue there. They're gonna offer their solutions. Some are gonna be acquired. Some others are gonna just go out of business. That's normal. I don't think that's a right or wrong thing. The problem is that it brings a lot of those acronyms and different technologies, different things, and it confuses everybody, right? I mean, especially for a subset of the market, which is not very familiar with cyber yet. You come with the soup of acronyms and say, oh, mine is better because it has an X and not an E. And, you have all these different things. It confuses people. And I agree with that. I think we need to be going back to the core, which is, it's not about a tool. It's not about an application. It's not about a single solution. There's no magic pill, right? I often say, if you want to lose weight, you got to exercise and you got to, live healthy, right? You eat better eating habits, that kind of stuff. The same applies to cyber, right? You want to protect your system. You got to go through the journey, right? The definition of, do I know what I have, right? So you would be doing assessments and discovering what you have. Do you know where you're going? Right? What is the future, right? Maybe you think about, okay, I may have several solutions that I want to implement, but you got to have a why. Why are you doing all those things, right? And then you also have why you're going through this journey, you want to monitor, right? So you want to be able to either manually by doing assessments on a periodic basis, or you have a tool that helps you automate that process. Something that tells you that you're progressing, because on the other side is, you have all these different solutions out there, but your power to purchase them or to acquire these solutions will go along the business justification provide to your organization, right? So if you go there and say, I want to invest $1 million, buy 20 solutions, and you don't explain why, you don't explain what the return on investment, which is very hard for cyber to achieve, probably you're not going to go anywhere. And in 10 years from now, you're going to be exactly the same point, right?
Yeah. That's a great point. You bring up asking that question, why? I'd be kind of interested, painting with some broad strokes here a little bit. If you had to give the industrial sector, or at least the part of it that you touch on a regular basis, sort of a letter grade in terms of how well they actually know their organization and what their cybersecurity needs and what their threat landscape looks like, how well do they know it? Would you give them a B? Would you give them an A? How are we doing there? Because it feels like a lot of these questions seem very basic and very simple, but they're very, very important because there's so much that we should know that maybe we don't, just internally, before we can even pick a lot of these tools.
Yeah, it's hard to rate because I wouldn't say there is an average concept, right? Okay. You have, in my view, and that's something that I've been saying for many years, right? I have a couple of theories about how the market behaves in this space, especially on the automation side, right? To me, you have the bucket of users, the extreme case, right? You have the bucket of users which are in the protection mode, right? So they use cyber to protect their systems. And then you have another subset of customers which are in the, I use cyber from a convenience point of view. I like the tooling, I like the technology, I like to experiment. And then you have, of course, the shades in between, right? It's not always 1 or 0, right? And I feel like you can be grade A in either case, right? The important piece is that you've got to have this definition of what you have and where you're going. And I think that's where most customers are lacking, right? The fact that they might not necessarily know what they want, or sometimes they don't even know what they have, and they're just going, right? The first seller that comes to your door says, hey, I have this, 3 solutions. I just choose through 2 of the 3, go and implement. And then all of a sudden, 5 years into this, you say, why did I do that again? I don't remember, right? And I think that's very important. It's basic. Nobody's coming with rocket science technology, any special algorithm. It's just a definition. Hey, I have to put a plan. This is where I want to be in 10 years, right? It's not going to be a one-day journey, right? It's going to be a long journey. Probably that journey will never end because, the threat landscape changes and evolves, right? So you always have to keep up with that. But at least you have a goal. Hey, I want to be better. these are the couple of things I'm going to do in the short term. When I get there, I measure, reevaluate, and set that end goal again, and keep doing it, right? So there's no single pill, magic pill. I don't believe in that kind of strategy, fortunately, right?
Well, I think the two things there, and there was a lot of really good stuff there, but I think the one thing is it's okay that it changes. I mean, it's going to constantly evolve because, like you said, the threat landscape is always changing. Hackers are always evolving. And the other thing is just to gain that base knowledge. I think a lot of people try to, you pick your acronym here, eat the elephant, drink the ocean, whatever. Don't get so bogged down in all this big picture stuff, which while it is important, you got to start at home. You got to start with the core, the fundamental stuff, and build out from there. Just trying again, by covering those core fundamentals, you're making the hacker's job a little more difficult every time you branch out a little bit. So I think that's what kind of gets lost in the
Yeah, and I would say, one thing that I'll maybe later, as we have a chat, I can allude to that. So just at a high level, I have this opinion, again, lots of theories here, right, that I have this, navigating through this journey.
Yeah.
OT, right, the operations technology, they tend to buy tangible items, right? So what I normally call the bill of material, right? When you talk to OT and speak about cyber, there is a proposal with line item, the items there. I know how much it costs. I buy, I get it delivered tomorrow. Off I go. You don't talk about vision. IT has been used to the adoption of a vision for a long time, right? I buy something today, aiming that kind of long-term goal, and I know some things are not available today, but it's okay to experiment because I'm on this mode of evolving, and I know the threat landscape is going to change. So I'm okay. I'm more comfortable to have a more intangible or high-level discussion, and that's where I think the kicker is. How do we get the OT to actually adopt more of a vision instead of having to buy what can be delivered tomorrow or today kind of thing, right?
No, that's a real paradigm shift for a lot of those individuals to be that fluid in terms of your planning, because you're right. They're talking about fixed assets in most cases and what that technology looks like. Now we're looking at, like you said, less durable, less touchable type of stuff. It's a great point. Another key thing, I think you'd be an interesting perspective on this one. We hear a lot of sort of false security coming from this whole secure by design concept. And I think a lot of times people fall into that trap of, yes, I've got this legacy setup, but I'm plugging in new stuff from Emerson or whoever the case may be. I should be good because they're telling me it's secure by design. But in the process, they're not checking that connection point. They're not always checking the end point as well. So it's still need to go to that extra step. What's sort of been your experience, or what kind of best practices could you pass along? And yeah, it's great to have that in that new components, but you still got to check the legacy stuff as well to make sure you're not creating a new soft spot just by bringing in new technology, which is prominent with all this IoT stuff.
Yeah, and I concur with you. I think there's a lot of the reliance, again, it goes back to the magic pill approach, right? I mean, if you make my life easier, giving me assurance that what you do internally as a company, as a vendor, right, is all good. I don't have to do anything else. I mean, it would be great if that was a reality, but it's not, right? I mean, the reality is everybody has to do their homework. The homework that the vendor can do is to make sure they have secure development lifecycle in place. That will lead into a secure by design product, right? Now, the product interfaces with many different things to build an ecosystem. The ecosystem still has to be vetted, evaluated, assessed, right? For more protections to be put in place. So you got to bring that all into perspective, right? Because again, you may get a product that's very secure by design, all the homework has been done, but then you go and, change the architecture, change the network infrastructure, put, radio links in the middle. You open up for public connections. You interface with cloud. You can't just say that that's bad. I never do that, because reality is you're going to do those.
Yeah.
So what you do to make sure you can not only adopt the new technologies and still maintain the things secure is to assess, apply whatever solutions have to be put in place, and then make sure you somehow provide that assurance without just using the sticker of, oh, I have an SDL or I have a secure by design product out of the box. Again, it all goes back to this whole perception that if you tell me you're good, I'll just trust it. But you got to verify. There's no way to trust without the verification, unfortunately, right?
Yeah. Well, and I'm glad you bring that up because that seems to be another huge paradigm shift or challenge for specifically the OT security or the OT space, and specifically because we've got a lot of different tools out there to help protect users, protect these networks, whether it's the double factor authentication. Some people want to go to zero trust, whatever the case may be, but there's just such a reluctance to grab onto this. And I don't know if it's because it's a time thing. I don't know if it's because I got to go to check my phone for the code or whatever the case may be. But in your experience, is this a technology thing? Is this a paradigm shift? Is this a cultural thing again? What are some of the issues we're having there? Because a lot of these hacks that we hear about, it's credential harvesting and a lot of the really basic stuff that could have been prevented with some of these tools that are sort of universally available.
Yeah, the thing is that we forget about the basics all the time, right? I mean,
Yeah.
and I think, when we talk about cyber, it doesn't matter which area, right? IT, OT, you always have the triad, right? The people, process, and technology, right? And I think we put a lot of more emphasis on the technology side, what tooling I can use, how can I integrate that kind of stuff. Somehow we pay attention to people, right? At a given point. Oh, well, I don't have the people. That's usually the concern. I don't have the people, hard to find the people. The people I find, they come in, get trained, and leave. That is a challenge, but at least you pay some attention. The part that I always feel like is forgotten is the process, right? You think about two-factor authentication as you gave an example, right? You as a corporation, you may decide that that's a good idea. Great. You go and implement, and then you get the memo, right? Think about a process control plant. I'm not talking about a lab environment or a corporate environment, right? Where you have your laptop and a disruption may not cause a major issue, right? Per se. You go on a processing facility and then you all of a sudden change the process. Now you can no longer use your credentials. You got to use a smart card, for example, with a PIN. Yeah. And that person forgot the card. What do you do? Right? Just say, well, go back home and bring it up, or you're not going to work today. You're not going to get your, you're going to get an absence. You're in our registry. And what happens with the process? What happens with your function? So process is important. So normally when we say, piggybacking on the two-factor authentication again, when we do that for Delta V, the first thing that I say to people is, what about the process? How you're going to roll it out? I get you're going to have cards and readers and all that kind of stuff, right? How to maintain. But more importantly, are you going to just turn on the key and all of a sudden everybody has to have a card? What happens with that user that will push back and will forget or break his or her card, right? We need to have some adoption phase. And that is true for everything, right? Before putting the protection in place, you got to change the procedure, you got to train the personnel, you got to make sure the adoption will be maximum, or at least you're striving to get maximum. If you just go with a pushback 100% my way or the highway, I feel like the adoption just continues to go low, and you just get, instead of adopters, you get people not embracing, right, the technology.
They don't embrace, and then they make mistakes, and you become more vulnerable along the way. Absolutely, couldn't agree more.
Yeah, or bypasses, right? I mean, you can think about, you build, that's what normally happens, right? You build an internal community of hackers at that point, because they'll find their way to bypass whatever protection you're putting in place when they should be paying attention to something else, right?
No, well said. Absolutely. So, Peish, we've been talking about a lot of challenges, but there's also a lot of solutions out there, and I know you're working on a lot of them at Emerson. Maybe you can talk to me a little bit about some of the things that you're seeing right now that Emerson is doing to help support some of these cybersecurity efforts.
But the thing that is mostly being mentioned in the market right now is threat monitoring or intrusion detection, right? The solutions that you see many companies actually in the market offering today. And this is something that in 2 years ago, we actually invested good money to, find the right partners, because we don't want to reinvent the wheel. That's the other piece, right? I mean, you got to trust on the partnerships that you can build, or the time to market gets very complicated. So threat monitoring has been a big hitter, in my opinion. And threat monitoring would include asset inventory. You have vulnerability management. You have playbooks for incident response. Those things are all part of what I call threat monitoring. And I think that is a big hitter that we're seeing. And then, of course, going back to that adoption of vision versus by bill of material, I think the third point is, you mentioned briefly already, the zero trust discussion, right?
Yeah.
I think, again, zero trust network architecture, if you speak to the big tech companies that are driving the IT business, they have that all defined, right? You have a
Yeah.
framework, people are already executing OT. We don't have one yet. I mean, a real thought through zero trust network architecture model for OT that works across agnostically. We don't have one. And I think that's something that we need to get to. And I think also the reason why we don't have one formally and officially designed is because it is very dependent on having a bill of material. And that's the fallacy, right? You got to
Yeah.
be a little more open for, okay, I'm going to put a plan and I may not have all the answers today. I have to wait a couple of years to get there, right? I mean, you go by certification as an example, right? How many companies out there have the bare minimum IEC 62443 standard certification for their systems? I mean, you have a handful of those. So if a customer today does the good job of assessing their sites or their production unit, and you want to get to security level 2, 3, or 4, they're not going to buy anything because there's none of that available. But that shouldn't preclude you from actually designing and setting your vision. You just plot a
Yeah.
plan, wait until things are available, and then embrace and put pressure on the vendors to actually get there faster, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Interesting. You brought up a lot of things that are talking about threat response and understanding the threat landscape. Not so much, we talk a lot about threat intelligence as well. That's a little bit of a different topic. But in going down that route a little bit, are there certain types of tactics or strategies that you're seeing hackers trying to initiate right now that are maybe more prominent than they have been in the past?
The attacker industry, let's put it that way, right? The evil side of the house. Uh, they're like water, right? They're going to go through the easier path, right? And
Yeah.
if the easier path does not require you to have very strong exploits or very sophisticated type of implementations, they're just going to do whatever they can today. I mean, why spend time inventing stuff if I don't need them, right?
Yeah.
Eventually, that's going to change. The threat monitoring and the threat intelligence that you mentioned, right? The use of artificial intelligence, right? Machine learning. Uh, and not much on the artificial intelligence per se, but more so from pulling data from all sorts of sensors, right? That, we're monitoring so much these days that eventually we're going to have a database that's going to allow us to be more proactive. And that's when the game will start to change, because instead of me protecting my house, you protecting your house, I'm going to be telling you, hey, somebody tried to break in my house using this technique. And you're going to get clever and say, well, maybe I need a different lock. And then you improve your site based on my experience. And that's what I think needs to happen, right? The whole
Yeah.
exchange of information, not much on making a deception plan, which, is also available, right? And it's just too costly, I think, currently.
Yeah. I'd like to get your take on another thing. You talked about a lot of these vulnerabilities that are popping up, and being an automation company like Emerson is, I'm sure you've had some experience in working with patches, issuing them and helping people implement them. As again, I'm sure you're very well familiar with, this is a challenge in the industrial sector and the operational technologies environment because we got to shut stuff down. And that goes against the very premise of what we're trying to do and get product out the door. So what's some have been your experience in terms of helping people implementing these patches and getting back up and running just as quickly as possible?
Yeah, so I think the stigma of early days of patching, and that came of course with using off-the-shelf technology like Windows operating systems, right? And the whole old terminology of, oh, the patches never get deployed right, and I always have the blue screen eventually, and those kind of things, right? A lot has been done, right, from most of them. And I'm not picking on one vendor or another. I'm just saying that in general, there's a lot of work that has been put in place to make this process better. So that is just to say that there is a way to actually maintain production up while you're patching, right? You don't have to shut it down 100% so that you can patch. So this whole notion that, oh, I will wait my turnaround in 2, 3 years time to do a simple patch, those days are over, in my opinion. I think companies that are still going with that kind of methodology, they're behind big time from a cyber perspective. You got to patch, right? And you got to
Yeah.
go, you made the elect to go with the critical ones and then wait for the turnaround to do the less critical ones. That's a more affordable approach. Although going back to Windows, right? I mean, with Windows 10, the change from piecemeal patching, right, with the KBs to a cumulative package, has been around for how many years now, right? More than 4 or 5, right? So you can't really elect anymore. That means that if you're not patching a little bit now, you're never going to be able to catch up until you do the full patch with is cumulative. So number one, the recommendation I give is make sure you have a plan to partially patch your system while in production. And you can do that, right? Workstations wise, you can go one by one, and depending on your process, if it's batch or continuous, you may start from one server to another, depends on the use case. Controllers wise, right? When you're patching, applying hot fixes to your embedded devices, there's always redundancy. I mean, rarely you would see a control system that does not have redundancy, right? So what you do is you patch the standby, keep working in simplex mode for a while, then, swap, do the other patching, continue. You can do that live. You don't have to stop your plant to take that on. Again, I wouldn't do that without or simply trusting the vendor, right? Saying, oh yeah, the patch has been tested, great, I will just apply because I have redundancy. Have your trial system, have your, test system, the validation system. Highly encourage people to go and before applying a Windows patch, before applying an embedded device patch, put that in your, sandbox. Dry run it. Once you're comfortable, well, now it's more closer to your environment, go and patch. But avoiding the patch because of, it's disruptive, or I feel like it's going to come up with a blue screen. Yeah, that's old-fashioned approach, unfortunately, right?
One of the things that I heard another vendor talking about was over-the-air updates. Basically, we've seen these deployed, in the automotive sector. Tesla is the one championing it there. Do you think is this going to become a best practice? Is this practical for a lot of these industrial settings, or are we still a ways off from really seeing that come to reality?
I think to get there, we vendors, right, will have to come up with a way to do that without any disruption, period, right? If there is a potential risk that, you're assuming on behalf of a user, then you can't make it happen. And that's where we are today, right? We got to switch over. You got to, go machine 1, 2, 3, and 4. You can't do everything at once, right? So you can't really make it all over the air with no interface or interpretation of what's going on, or even validation. So that part, I think there's time until we're going to get there, but I would assume that that's the best approach, right? Yeah. You gave Tesla as an example. I'm a Tesla user, right? So I have that as an important factor. But, I always think about that, right? Correlating to my business. Imagine if one day a patch is deployed and then I can't see my screen anymore, right? Yeah. I don't have any indicators in the car. That's my indicator, right? So that is critical. And I'm sure before deploying any patches, they're considering all the permutations. Now, a car is a much more closed environment, right? The ecosystem is much more controlled. The control system, even on the DCS space, the distributed control system side, you still have so many permutations that it's hard for you to replicate in factory 100% of the use cases. So I still feel like there's evolvement, even the time it takes to get there, right? So deploying a patch is not a 2 seconds endeavor, right? Or a couple of minutes. It takes time. Yeah. So that has to be minimized in order for you to start thinking about on-the-fly updates, right?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because then that brings in potentially using 5G networks that would be much faster and raises a lot of other cost concerns as well as security concerns that just make potentially people shy away from something like that. But I agree with you. I think it is the wave of the future, and it is something that we'll have to figure out for a number of reasons.
Yeah, and the connectivity, right? You mentioned 5G or any type of connectivity. Again, you're opening yourself up, right? If you're doing a patch over the air with 5G, for example, right? That means I have a very high level privilege over that system to do something, right? And that something could be used maliciously, right? So at that point, you gotta, okay, how do I protect that? Maybe you have to open a request from inside out. Maybe you open during a period and you have witnessing or supervision when that's done. Now, what we're doing, and maybe that's a good one to share, maybe not as much to do an over-the-air or on-the-fly update, but come up with automation for patching, right? Many years, what people have been using for patching is, well, I go with Microsoft WSUS or SCCM and the off the shelf packages. For Delta V, for example, we have a product, right? We have integrated patch management is a solution that we actually use to patch your system in an automated fashion, right? Okay, it doesn't do everything, right? It's not a single click of a button, everything magically gets patched, but it makes the process much faster and much easier, right? Less intervention, less, moving files around is all taken care of by the application.
Interesting. I think the one button thing would make me more nervous than anything else. So that's all right. Hey, Peish, this has been awesome. As we kind of wind down here a little bit, just kind of want to get your thoughts on it, what you see as some of the bigger trends maybe impacting industrial cybersecurity. We hit on AI a little bit. We've talked about some patching and some other things going on. But are there other things that you see as really potentially being the higher level topics that we're going to be talking more about?
Yeah, I think the other one, we talked about cyber feeds, right? The conceptualization of a journey. We talked about monitoring, right? The threat monitoring and intrusion detection, which uses threat intelligence as part of the package. I think AI in general is going to be a very disruptive type of technology. And I can't see us progressing much further with cyber without AI. Microsoft is a good example. They're already using that. You can see that in the public domain. How far that's going to go, how far reaching is going to go into the OT space, that's yet to be seen. I think another one that's becoming very popular now, and that's mainly because we lack, in most cases, visibility over OT. Not everywhere, but in some cases, the software bill of material, right? I was at S4 2-3 years ago. That was the big hitter, right? Okay, how do you know what you have? And again, different than an asset inventory, software bill of material allows you to know exactly what you have, not only from, I have a Delta V version X, but also what kind of components I have running, right? Because am I running open source? Do I have any third party applied there? Because I have to patch all these things eventually, right? And if there is a vulnerability on these things, how would I even know if I don't even know the thing is installed on my computer, right? So I think that is one that is becoming more and more of a big hitter, right? Knowing what you have so that you can control better, and not only trust, hey, call the vendor and, hey, can you tell me if you're vulnerable or not? Which, is something that we still do, but I feel like it has to be more automated, right? So that you can also verify and not only trust and wait for a potential answer, right? Those are the kind of, AI, software bill of material, SBOM, monitoring threat detection, and the cyber feed for contextualization of your journey.
Yeah, the SBOM conversation is interesting. We still hear people struggling with the Log4j stuff. It seems like if you really want to send those operational technology guys with their hands in the air running from the plant floor, start talking about SBOMs though, because it's a very involved, very necessary, but very involved dynamic now that's emerging is becoming more and more important for cybersecurity. So that'll be interesting too.
And that's unfortunately one of the prices we pay for all of these, right? Which is I need to have the people to actually go and monitor and manage all of these, right? Having an SBOM tool doesn't address all the answers, right? It will require somebody to run the tool, evaluate the tool, take actions on the tool, feedbacks and whatnot. And that's true for everything, right? And I think, in the people side, there's a lot of conversations, the whole thing about unicorns. How do I find these people that are hard to find, hard to reach? I have some opinions about that, but I think that's conversation for a longer chat.
Thanks, Peish. And for more information on the work he and his colleagues do, you can check them out at emerson.com. I'd like to thank you for joining us today, and to catch up on past episodes, you can go to manufacturing.net, IEN.com, or mbtmag.com. You can also check Security Breach out wherever you get your podcasts, including Apple, Amazon, and Overcast. And if you have a cybersecurity story or topic that you'd like to have us explore on Security Breach, you can reach me at jeff@ien.com. For Alexandre Peixoto, I'm Jeff Ranke, and this is Security Breach.